Hello students, welcome back. In today's session, we are going to take The Shield of Achilles by Auden from paper 2. So how did it all begin for Auden? Auden's mother was a devout Christian, and so that kind of affirmed his faith in Christianity. You see a lot of such images, not only in this poem, but in a lot of other poems as well that are prescribed in your syllabus. As in images of ancient world as opposed to the modern world that numb you entirely. Okay, so this poem, The Shield of Achilles, is about Thetis, who's the sea goddess and also the mother of Greek hero Achilles, who's the subject of our poem here. Observing images of modern chaotic world and her extreme cry of despair and dismay and disappointment in the end, which you do not want to notice, but you're supposed to because it is extremely heavy and it is extremely fearful. So we begin understanding the poem stanza by stanza for our better clarity. When we are doing these poems or these poets, we're not just looking at the summary and just doing tidbits of what the poem is about or what the poet is about. We go by doing the entire poem, poet by poet, poems by poems, line by line, so that our understanding of these poets is clear and clear in such a way that we are able to write best of the answers in the exam. So we'll look at one stanza and then line by line we'll begin understanding it, and then we'll follow up the next one. Like that we'll complete the poem. Okay, I will begin looking at the first stanza. Let's read the poem together first of all. She looked over his shoulder for vines and olive trees, marble well-governed cities, and ships upon untamed seas. But there on the shining metal his hands had put instead an artificial wilderness and a sky like that. Now here, as I look at the poem, it says the first line, she looked over his shoulder. Now who is she here? She here refers to Achilles' mother, the sea goddess that we were talking about, who's going to observe images of modern chaotic world that you and I are living in constantly. So she here refers to Achilles' mother. She looked over his shoulder. Now here his refers to Hephaestus. Now this Hephaestus is carving images on Achilles' shield that he's going to take with him in the war. So she looked over his shoulder, Hephaestus' shoulder. So the mother is observing all the images that he's carving on Achilles' shield. For vines and olive trees, marble well-governed cities, and ships upon untamed seas. This refers to Greek images that he's carving on Achilles' shield. Vines and olive trees. And ships upon untamed seas. These are the images that Hephaestus is carving on Achilles' shield, and the mother is observing, she's noticing. But there on the shining metal, now shining metal here refers to again Achilles' shield. But then what he says, his hands had put instead, and I think you remember the mother is noticing all the images, an artificial wilderness and a sky like lead. Instead, to the mother's surprise, Thetis' surprise, she notices that Hephaestus is carving images of muddled, modern, chaotic, disappointed modern civilization that you and I are living in. And you see that she's terrified when she looks at those images because she knows immediately what's going to come to her son now. Now, as we move on, we look at the next stanza. It says, a plain without a feature, bare and brown, no blade of grass, no sign of neighborhood, nothing to eat and nowhere to sit down, yet congregated on its blankness stood an unintelligible multitude, a million eyes, a million boots in line, without expression, waiting for a sign. Now, here Thetis notices that just on a mere announcement, this whole army of soldiers, it starts to move without questioning, without discussing. Out of the air, a voice without a face, on a mere announcement, proved by statistics that they're quickly convinced, because these leaders, they in some or the other way end up justifying these wars to people. So they're convinced, proved by statistics, in tones as dry and level as the place, in dry tones, they convince people. No one was cheered and nothing was discussed, because no one has the audacity to question these leaders. So nothing was discussed. No one was happy, but because they're supposed to do it, so they do it. Column by column, in a cloud of dust, they marched away. And so they start to walk. They start to march. Whose logic brought them? Maybe their logic brought them here. But to some other set of people who were killed in the war, whose brother, whose son, whose family is killed in the war, to them it only brings, look at the last line, somewhere else to grief. It only brings a lot of grief, a lot of melancholy, a lot of despair, a lot of disappointment, and a lot of dismay throughout their life. Now let's look at the next stanza. You see, this stanza gives you a hint of change in events. She looked over his shoulder for ritual pieties, white flower garlanded heifers, libation and sacrifice. But there, on the shining metal, where the altar should have been, she saw by his flickering forge light quite another scene. So you see, till now, the mother, Thetis, she ends up noticing a lot of images related to chaotic modern world. But now she is looking for some spiritual images, some religious images. But what she ends up finding, that we find in this particular stanza. She looked over his shoulder for ritual pieties, for the spiritual images maybe that she's looking for. And then you look at the last four lines. But there on the shining metal, white flower garlanded heifers refers to cows, and the image of cow, which she's looking for, which is a symbol of purity. But there on the shining metal where the altar should have been. So she's looking for religious images, spiritual images. But what she ends up seeing, she saw by his flickering forge light quite another scene, and she ends up seeing barbed wires, which is what you notice in the next stanza. Then we have our next stanza, which says, barbed wire enclosed in arbitrary spot, wire fences that we were talking about, barbed wire fences, the image of wire fences that she notices on Achilles' shield, where board officials lounged, one cracked a joke, and sentries sweated, for the day was hot. Sentries here refers to a guard who's on duty here. And then a crowd of ordinary decent folk. This crowd notices what? Watched from without, and neither moved nor spoke, as three pale figures were led forth and bound. So what this crowd notices? This is the image that Hephaestus is carving on Achilles' shield, and she's terrified looking at that image because she was looking for spiritual images, and suddenly what she finds is this image where three people are held captive and they're taken, look at the last line, to three posts driven upright in the ground. Driven in the ground. This is the image that she notices on Achilles' shield when she was looking for religious, calming, soothing, spiritual images. You see, she's terrified when she looks at that bleeding image on her son's shield. Okay, now another very significant stanza that says, the mass and majesty of this world, all that carries weight and always weighs the same, lay in the hands of others. They were small and could not hope for help, and no help came. What their foes liked to do was done, their shame was all the worst could wish. They lost their pride and died as men before their bodies died. So again, it refers to how we have given all of our powers in the hands of corrupted rulers, and in that way, we've all lost our sense of self, our sense of identity, and our sense of pride. So, if you look at these lines, that carries weight and always weighs the same, lay in the hands of others, in the hands of tyrant rulers. We've given our powers, and we are engaged in the best possible way in really doing nothing for this world. And then again in the next stanza, you see the similar images. She looked over his shoulder, for athletes at their games, men and women in a dance, moving their sweet limbs, quick, quick to music. So she's again looking for joyous images in her son's shield that Hephaestus is carving. But what she ends up discovering is, but there on the shining shield his hands had set no dancing floor, but a weed choked field. Again, it gives you a sense of suffocating image, something that terrifies her, something that brings fear to her heart. Now we have one of the most important stanzas that says, a racked urchin, aimless and alone, loitered about that vacancy a bird, flew up to safety from his well-aimed stone, that girls are raped, two boys knife a third, were axioms to him who'd never heard of any world where promises were kept, or one could weep because another wept. So again, another image where you see a boy moving around aimlessly and trying to hit a bird, and how the bird is trying to save itself. So this is the first image. And the second image, so we live in a world where girls are raped and two boys knife a third, two boys, they come together and try hitting or try killing or try murdering the third one. And so this boy maybe has never even heard of a world where ancient people used to live, where people would think literally all the time that they're under some supreme control, and if they do something bad, bad will definitely come to them. But Thetis is contemplating on all of these images and the fact that this boy cannot even think at the back of his mind that in the ancient world people even lived like that, where promises were kept, if you look at the last second line, or one could weep because another wept, the last line, that people felt empathy, they felt sympathy for each other. And so these are the images that Hephaestus is carving in front of her on her son's shield, a boy aimlessly wandering around trying to hit the bird, a world where girls are raped, a world where we are no more safe, where people murder each other, where there are no promises, where there's no space for feelings of empathy or sympathy. Thetis is extremely, extremely fearful. She's extremely taken over by these images. Now we have our last stanza that says, the thin-lipped armorer Hephaestus hobbled away Thetis of the shining breast, cried out in dismay at what the god had wrought to please his son, the strong iron-hearted man slaying Achilles, who would not live long. So you see in this stanza, the poet says, he shows how even Hephaestus, he walks away in grief, because he's the one who has carved all of those images in Achilles' shield, and Thetis, the mother, cannot really do anything about it, and eventually she gives a loud cry, a cry in dismay, in extreme dismay, in extreme disappointment. because she knows that with such images being carved on her son's shield, and by such images I refer to the images of modern civilization, of the modern world, the chaotic world, the indifferent world where people's attitude, it has become indifferent. And so Thetis knows that with such images being carved on her son's shield, he will not live long, and hence she gives a loud shriek, a loud cry in extreme disappointment. So this ends our poem. Also, on that note, to join our UPSC IAS optional English literature classes, you may call or WhatsApp us at 8865028865 or log on to finlandacademy.com for any information related to our courses. Thank you for joining me here. Take care.